All right, Team 7, we've got another project here for you. This one was a special request to go over Quadrant. Please let us know as well after you watch the video if audio levels are acceptable to you. We've spent some time tinkering and upgrading equipment, so we definitely want your feedback on that as well. So this is Quadrant. This is a mapping of decentralized data. This one's another one that's kind of airy a little bit, but I'm going to try to give you some examples that will make this make a little bit more sense and make sure that the mechanics of how this project operates is making sense to you. So we've got your normal risk, and this doesn't apply to you or you, and this isn't for you, this isn't a security, this isn't, you know, stakes in the company stuff here. So we're going to scroll past those pages. So this is our summary, our abstract here. This is dealing with the type of data that they're wanting to mine and how they're disseminating it. So vast amounts of authentic data are needed to power today's algorithms. However, current data economy is fraught with problems. And when it's talking about authentic data and what they're wanting to do with that, it's, you know, you can just space up some data real quick and make it look like information, like location data off of cell phones, and it can be out of date, it can be incorrect and spoofed, and you can generate a lot of income by selling that metadata to whoever's buying data. And companies that are buying that type of data are trying to do either marketing analysis, machine learning, AI teaching type of stuff, or it's just pure marketing for demographic data, like people in this age group are purchasing this type of material most often at this time of day, or people in this area are purchasing this type of stuff. You know, like it's a great time to be pushing more shoe ads in Tennessee because people in Tennessee are buying shoes right now. So that's the kind of data we're talking about, and that's who's selling it. And authenticity of the data is important, because if you feed a machine learning program incorrect data, it starts to make incorrect assumptions, and you've either got to go back and delete all of that learning that it's done, and that's a lot of time and energy, like power wasted, to have to go back and reteach a machine something because you got junky information. So nobody wants that either. So there's a widening gap, though, between those that have the resources to collect and store their own data and those that do not. It doesn't specifically come out and say it. Those that do, that's Google, Amazon, Facebook, companies that are already doing web hosting or offer services that people input their metadata willingly. So when you go onto Facebook and you say, I like this and this and this, and this is my email address, and I can, if I'm on Facebook, I can see when you log in, log out, what times you're active. All of that type of metadata can be used for those things we were talking about, whether it's marketing, machine learning, those type of things, because Facebook could be writing a machine learning script that deletes pictures that don't meet term of service, you know, automatically without somebody having to look at each one, and it's learned that it needs to delete pictures most often after 4 o'clock in the afternoon in this certain time zone here. So it doesn't have to just be that it's selling you an ad, it can also just be machine learning that's doing a task more efficiently or quickly. But companies like that you're already feeding them your metadata, they have it a lot easier than, say, someone that's got to go out to a data broker and purchase that metadata from someone. So those are the do not haves, or the people that they're trying to do some type of data research or machine learning, but they have to go out and purchase that data from one of those larger companies that's already amassing it while offering other services. So these data have-nots do have access, but it's often fragmented or of questionable authenticity. The kind of data that produces poor results when fed to algorithms. Part of the reason why the data lacks authenticity is because the suppliers are not properly incentivized. And that's pointing out that, you know, you can make a quick buck by just making a database with a bunch of metadata. It might be out of date, might not be true, and you'll get paid for it. And there's, you know, you're selling it to an aggregator, they're not checking it, and then they just keep on moving. There's no reason not to do that at this point, because who's going to call you out on it? Somebody would have to actually test each piece of data. Nobody's going to do that. So without a healthy and transparent data economy, increasing demand for authentic data cannot be met. So right now, every time you turn around, there's a new product or project that you hear about where somebody's got machine learning doing this or automated marketing's doing that. We're seeing a lot of ICOs right now that are based off of some of these concepts as well, where they're internet advertising, internet marketing. A lot of these white papers mention how they're going to be using machine learning to make their projects as efficient as possible, and those are the type of companies that are having to go out and purchase data. And if there's not enough data on the market in a specific portion of research, like I need to know about people that purchase shoes after 4 o'clock in Tennessee, there might only be a couple aggregators that have that data available to purchase. If it's not enough to get your system at 100% efficiency or as close as possible, you're just waiting for more data to be mined out of people. So Quadrant aims to solve these problems by providing a blueprint for mapping disparate data sources. So you have aggregators right now that are just putting all this data together. This is a blockchain-based way of stamping who's providing data, when they provided it, to make sure it's proper and true, and then bringing it all together where you can, I'm not going to say you can bypass the middleman, because you still need somebody to aggregate this stuff together, but you can purchase the correct segment of data from each aggregator that has it. So if you're just looking for data on shoes, you don't have to buy all the data an aggregator has on clothing purchases. You can just get the shoe data and just purchase that portion. So it'll support proof of data authenticity and provenance by data sampling and the creation of constellations. This is a term they're going to be using a lot in this white paper. So constellations are data smart contracts, and then they'll talk about mega constellations as well for disparate data sources. So that's multiple different, dApps, cell phone apps, whatever, that's providing that data, but it's all on the same subject and congregating it together. That's a constellation. And by doing this as well, and that it's hashed, it's fair remuneration and incentive sharing for whoever is mining that data. So the person that puts a little SDK kit inside a cell phone app for a game that's monitoring location, and they're providing location data, each piece of metadata that they're going to produce is going to be stamped, so that when it's aggregated later, they still get a cut, not just paid once from the aggregator for a month's worth of data or a day's worth of data. They'll continue to get paid for it instead of just getting paid once. Data consumers can then trust the authenticity of the data they purchase. Nurseries, which are data producers, that's the person that's putting the location sniffer inside of a cell phone app, or the person that has a dApp that's pulling something down, or whatever else it is, that's pulling down metadata that people are interested in. And that those producers are compensated fairly every time their data is used. And then pioneers, which is what they're calling data vendors, so that's your aggregator that's putting stuff together, have the incentive to create new innovative constellations. So before, they were just selling a set of information that was just metadata on clothing purchases. Now they're incentivized to create multiple constellations that can then interconnect. So like, here's our clothing constellation, here's a sub constellation that's just shoes, and then you can have something else that's just pants, shirts, whatever the demographic information you're looking to mine out is. So where Quadrant has the major potential for impact is its ability to provide elons. And this is a new term, and it's a new portion of the market that they're trying to build to find linkages between different constellations, and in turn create mega constellations that can be used by data consumers to solve real-world problems. This is where Quadrant differentiates itself from its competitors. So this is the little, beyond just aggregating data and going, here's 15 different sources of data on shoes and who's looking at shoes where. This is where someone can come in. They have a stake in quads that they're going to spend to take the time, and then they're going to get paid if people use this constellation that they invent, which can be correlated data between multiple different constellations, and it helps provide a clearer picture or more effective machine learning. So this can be the idea I came up with for this that made the most sense to me from doing a little research was, if you're pulling location data off of cell phones and you know what mode of transportation someone's using, you can fairly accurately, for a urban area, figure out how many people are on bicycles during certain times of the day. And if you're taking time to do machine learning for self-driving cars, it would be important to know when you need to spend extra time on the sensors that are pointed towards a bike lane. So that's something that you can give a priority to sensors on one side of the car just for watching for additional bike congestion. And that might be something that isn't currently available in just a basic set of data. You could pull that down, but then an E-line could, put 2 and 2 together and get a more definitive, effective picture for you. And then they get compensated for that inside the system. So Quadrant's designed to work with both centralized and decentralized services. So that means that if Google wants to purchase some data through the Quadrant system, they can. If you're a data scientist working on your thesis in graduate school, you can also purchase this on a decentralized server. So it can feed to a Fortune 500 company. It can feed to just one person. The architecture consists of the core Quadrant blockchain clients, the data producers, consumers, and anchors, which we're going to touch on later, and guardian nodes, which we're going to touch on later because it has to do with the anchors. Quadrant will operate on a proof of authority consensus mechanism. So proof of authority doesn't go over here in the white paper, which I appreciate because it gets rough every time we look at a white paper and it's got a big definition for proof of authority. But these will be nodes that are signed off by the creator of the blockchain, Quadrant Foundation in this particular instance, that these are qualified nodes that are run by people. They know who they are, and they are qualified and secured to write blocks. And by doing that, you're stepping over all of the time that gets spent with a proof of work algorithm. So this should be faster, takes less gas. Transactions, you should be able to squeeze more transactions per block into a proof of authority. So they're doing proof of authority for all of the movement of data back and forth inside the Quadrant system. That's why I'm skipping over guardian nodes and anchors right now, because that's a separate portion that works on proof of work. But if somebody has the question in Telegram, what does Quadrant run on? The Quadrant protocol runs on proof of authority. So that's their consistency mechanism, and that's how it can do all the stuff we just talked about. The external proof of work chain that will be used as an anchor for security purposes, that's going to be a side chain off of Ethereum. That's what's going to be proof of work because Ethereum is proof of work. We're going to go into more detail into that later in the paper. So Quadrant will utilize 2 different currencies for its network, eQuad and then Quad. So that's your ticker there is Quad and eQuad. So Quad's a utility token. It's designed to be used solely inside the network, and it will be used to stamp data. So that's marking which data miner produced it. Supports simple and complex access structures. There'll be some definitions for that later in the paper, so we'll touch on it again. Simple and complex subscription payment models. So again, if you're mining out data and you want to get paid for it every single time someone uses it, that's a complex subscription model, where a simple subscription model is, here's a constellation of data, I'm giving you access to it, this is a one-time fee. And for staking by Elons, so they have to have a stake, kind of like a proof of stake, to get access to a bunch of different constellations to make that wacky mega constellation of a conglomerated data. They need to be able to put up some tokens to have the ability to do that. eQuad, that's the token that's being generated for the ICO. That's an ERC20 compliant token that will be sold during the TGE and may be converted into Quad via a gateway when Quadrant mainnet is launched. That's in May, is what's on the roadmap. Everything sounds like it's rolling towards that. The TGE will have a hard cap, so this is for eQuad, of 20 million USD, and the TGE, if it raises over 7 million USD, contributions garnered will be locked initially and made transferable over a course of 4 years, with 40% becoming available upon the close of the eQuad token sale, and the remaining 60 released annually and applied towards the company's objectives at a fixed rate of 15%. So this is, if you have some people that are nitpickers on how much is the foundation holding, how much is going to the team, what's going to happen to the money when it moves, this is a great portion of the white paper to quote here. It's like, this is the minimum that they need to operate the system. Soft cap's already been reached, by the way, at this point when you're listening to this video. So all the additional funds, it's not just going to be Lambos for the team and hope they don't squander it. They're going to lock this up in a treasury account, and they're going to feed it out slowly so that everything continues to roll forward, and it ensures no overspending in initial years of startup. So if somebody goes, I'm really going to need a quantum computer next year to make this work, they can actually say we don't have the money instead of getting sweet talked into it. Then you got a whole pile of eQuad that's going to be created during the TGE event that's going to be distributed as follows: 40% for crowd sale, 20% being held by the company, 20% for stakeholders, and 10% reserve, 10% for team. That'll be broken down at the end of the white paper as well as what each portion of those are going to be used for. But this should answer most of those what's the money going to get spent on questions in an overview fashion. So now we're going to break down a little bit more into the data mining economy and why it's a market that's ripe for blockchain disruption right now. So there's a widening gap in between people that have easy access, or companies that have easy access to data, and then companies or people that do not have easy access. And it's getting bigger and bigger, where you're almost having to go and beg one of these companies if they want to share, and then the pricing is getting a little rough. Ubiquitous, fake, and unauthentic data destroying the usefulness of any algorithm. So this goes back to kind of my example. If you're a data scientist graduate student, that's going to be your field, and you're trying to find something to build your thesis on, you've got to go out and get data. Hopefully you're not spending an arm and a leg on it because you're just a grad student, and what might be offered cheapest might not be high quality data, and that's going to make it really tough to get a functioning algorithm, much less defend your thesis at that point. And unsustainable data feeds breaking production systems when they go offline. This has more to do with data aggregators. So as it is right now, if Amazon has a blackout for a day and they don't feed you any demographic data or location data for a couple days, or it gets lost, you get this big gap in what you're trying to learn or what you're trying to teach your computer. And this is just a side gig for these larger companies. It's a way to make more money off of something they're already using. There's not a lot of incentive for them to go back and make sure the little guys got all their information and all their ducks in a row the way they wanted it. And then there's an unfair revenue distribution for original data producers, and it's unfair for the original data producers. They sell it to a data aggregate once the data aggregator has paid for it. It's a one-time lump sum fee, and then the aggregator can turn around and sell that 10 times, 100 times, a million times. They keep getting paid for it each time they find a new buyer for it. The person that produced it, though, they got paid once. So in this model for Quadrant, they get paid more often because now it's stamped in the blockchain who produced it, and they get a small cut each time it's passed around. So if you're a visual learner, you got a little breakdown diagram here that can help you with that. So this is going to go into more detail for each one of these portions. This is the part where it starts naming names here. The example they're using instead of Facebook, that's why I used Facebook earlier, so you can use this one here. Data harvesters like Google have access to vast amount of data for its own projects. So purchase histories from Gmail, location histories from Google Maps, mobile activity from any cell phone that's on Android OS. It's able to take a much more holistic view, or a larger view, and as a result of having so many users, companies like this are producing AI innovations at a much larger scale, solving bigger problems, and producing better products. That's not a bad thing. It just is. Google or Alphabet's able to, mine a lot more data. They're not having to buy it from themselves, and it's in a very diverse, spread out amount of data, so they're able to work on lots of different projects, lots of fingers in the pies. It just doesn't mean that there's not someone else that doesn't have access to all this material that might not have a better world-changing idea, and they're not able to get a hold of that information. The guy that might invent the perfect driving car might be kind of like IBM back in the day. He might be in his garage with two buddies, but he's not able to get enough data to get his machine learning program off the ground right now. So the reality is that there's tons of data out there, and this goes a little bit deeper into what kind of devices are pulling data. So sensors, people, businesses, any technology that anyone can think of that's producing, this goes down to Internet of Things stuff. If your coffee pot's Bluetoothed into the internet, it can be recording how many cups of coffee you produce every day, so that that's another target demographic there that, now if you drink more than 5 cups of coffee, you're going to start getting ads that you need to reorder coffee on Amazon. So fake and unauthentic data. Data is easy to fake, copy, misinterpret, misrepresent. This makes it difficult for data consumers to properly vet data when purchasing from a third party because, here's the data you asked for, here's a giant pile of it. You can't go in and make sure that Mary Sue actually clicked on this button on her phone or she was actually at this location. You can't verify every single data point. You just have to trust that the service you bought it from is a reputable service and that they're not just buying junk data. You have no idea where it's coming from, though. So it's a little opaque right now. That's another thing that's a benefit of Quadrant is things will be a lot more transparent. You can tell where the data came from. So data vendors are not always scrupulous. Some are happy as long as they make a buck. Data consumers, therefore, are not always getting the authentic data that their systems depend on. Unauthentic data inputs equal a poor resulting output. In this case, for data-driven businesses, decisions, algorithms, trading, AI, machine learning applications, or oracles for smart contracts, if the data is false, the consequences can be dire. I think that last little bit there about smart contracts, if you're pulling data and it's supposed to be the oracle to say this is the result for a smart contract, that, to uber simplify, since you guys are the team that was on Ranking Ball, if you've got Ranking Balls listening to data purchases on who won a baseball game and they purchased the pile of metadata from the wrong network sources and it says the wrong team won, then you have an incorrect result paying out on Ranking Ball contracts. That would be bad because everyone would know eventually which team won, but you might not be sure if you're just buying bulk data just to confirm sources real quick. And then unsustainable data economy. We need more data to fix more problems. So free data is not sustainable. Nobody's giving this stuff away for free. The few people where you can just get some data, it's either not in the right format or it's not enough data to make any real decisions on. So, and no entity can continually produce data over the long haul without being compensated fairly for it, either directly or indirectly. The indirectly, that's your Google and Facebook, where they're offering services that they're marketing another way. Metadata is a result that they're finding another way to make money or make use of, but it's not the main driver of their service. So their fixes, or the problem they're trying to fix there, is what's needed is a sustainable ecosystem where producers are incentivized to produce authentic data and buyers that are willing to pay for it. Fair revenue distribution ties into this. Producers of original data sources have it the worst with respect for revenue distribution. They need to be incentivized to continue to produce data, yet most often they are not paid more than once for their data that they provide. So that's the part where it's like, if you have your cell phone app that's pulling location data, you're selling it to the data aggregator, you're getting paid that one time when you supply it to them. In Quadrant, you'll be paid each time it moves on to someone that's purchasing it. A couple little breakdowns here. Stakeholders, it's just saying that everybody in the economy gets paid, or in the ecosystem, not just the aggregator or the third-party middleman. And then goes on to consumers. This is the data scientists or AI learning projects that are trying to do things with it. This is kind of an unusual breakdown for this, but it's, whatever the project they're working on, I need data. They go out and search for it. They really want the data, so they offer to pay a lot for it. Then they feed the data in. Not all the data is authentic, so it doesn't produce the result they want. And then they realize that if they can pull data from multiple sources and cross-reference, that it'll work better. And then, so now they have the data from multiple sources, and they found out what the going rate is for it, so they can continue to roll forward in their project. And they've got a little diagram here. So if you're a visual learner, take a minute, check out the diagram. I'm going to skip over most of the data vendor portion, but this starts going into cross-pollination and replication. So replication and distribution of data is relatively cheap. Production costs can be high. It's essential that data vendors are able to cover the capital and input costs incurred during the creation and producing of data assets, because once the data leaves their walls, it can be duplicated at almost no cost. So making the file that has the data built into it, that's the hard part. Making a copy of it is the easy part. That's where a Google Drive or a really big hard drive, you just copy it over and then you sell it. That's the easy part. But accumulating it, codifying it, and making it into a usable template file, that's the hard part. And it takes, computing power, energy, a building to pile that computing power into. That's a lot of tough startup for something that you're going to get paid for once, and then it's going to get duped out a ton of times after that. Is everything making sense so far, Nick? Have I put you to sleep?
No, it's working out quite well. Makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very exciting, actually.
And it's interesting, but it's not just another marketing paper, but this does have marketing usage. So I see this having a couple different fields that could be adopted into, so it's got a little bit bigger spread.
Absolutely.
So this is more naming 3-letter acronyms. This one's only used a couple more times in the paper, but just so you don't get lost, ADPs are atomic data producers. The reason they're using that terminology is it's the smallest unit of measure for data production. So at this level, data value, the biggest problem is that small data producers are not paid their fair share of revenue made by the data that they produce. Individual data has no value on its own. The real value is derived when you combine it with other data sets. So this is how much is it worth to just know when Mary Sue was at Starbucks? It's worth nothing on its own, unless you're like Mary Sue's stalker and you want to know when she goes to Starbucks. It doesn't matter. But if you have 1,000 people when they rolled into Starbucks, that's something that's worth something. So as a result, most data producers will sell their data up the value chain to aggregators. That's that word I keep using. That's just somebody that's combining a lot of data together. And resellers, that's the person that after the aggregators found it, built it, sold it. That's somebody else that's just populating it over and over again, trying to find another buyer for it, who can sell interesting data sets alongside one another to multiply the impact of the insights. So if you're in this example that we're using here, the aggregator, you've got 10 different cell phone games that are all pulling location data. I know that sounds a little scary. It happens sometimes though. Clocking when people are going to different spaces. One chain of that is not worth a ton, but if you buy 10 chains, all 10 of those programs, then you got something that's worth it. You sell it off to a reseller. The resellers bought the 10 that you have, and they're doing that with a bunch of other companies. They have 1,000 sets of location data now for the same city. That's something that's worth a little bit more at that point. So atomic data producers, the person that's just doing the SDK on that one cell phone app, they get paid once. That's what we keep harping on here. They get paid once. So you take your CSV is just a file format. Don't sweat that too much. Don't have to Google anything there. It's a file format that metadata's saved into. It can have 1,000 medical prescriptions sourced from multiple atomic data producers, as an example. Figuring out the exact percentage of revenue to share among contributing atomic data producers is inherently cumbersome and expensive. So if you got thousands of listings in your file from 10 different companies, figuring out what percentage is used from each one of those companies, that's rough. So either you just take a pool share, you put in 30% of the data, you get 30% of the payment, but then only 10% of their data was used. It's not completely fair, but that's usually how it ends up working out. Having everything stamped on a blockchain, though, you can get down into a smart contract that will pay each person for what was actually used. So this is going into cross-pollination on the next portion here. No one producer has all the data, so data needs to be aggregated from different sources to be of value. We're not to the 1984 yet, where Big Brother knows everything about you. That's something that everybody loves to talk about on cable news, but we're not there yet. You can't just go to Google and they'll have everything you need for a data set. You have to go and talk to a couple different companies, a couple different aggregators to get everything you need. The example they're using here is Bloomberg and Yahoo Weather. Bloomberg doesn't create all the information available through its terminals. Yahoo doesn't have all the weather stations in the country, but these two services together can put their data together, and you can get most of the weather over a geographic area by touching on two sources. Now, where this gets to be into a problem, though, is if you're the consumer, the end user that's trying to use this data, and you're talking to 4 different aggregators here, 2, maybe 3 of those have bought that data from the original Atomic data producer, and then in this picture here, 2 of them have, in the middle, you've got one that's got everything. At the top, you've got one that's got the same data. Those 2 have both sold that data to the consumer. But at the bottom here, you've got somebody's replicated it and then replicated it to another data aggregator, and then they turned around and sold it. So this same consumer's bought the same data 3 times now, and there's 4 middlemen involved. So the price to get that same data set has gone up exponentially. They've gotten some other pieces of data with it, but you've gotten the same Mary Sue was at Starbucks at 4 o'clock. You've got it 3 times now, and you've paid for it 3 times, but it's the same data set each time. So data consumers end up buying duplicate data, resulting in wastes of time and money. But when data sources are hidden, cross-pollination limits the effectiveness of the aggregated data, because each one of these data aggregators is not sharing where they're getting their information from, because that would be a sales advantage to one of their competitors. They're not just going to say, oh yeah, we only get our data from these 2 cell phone games. They're just going to say they get a large amount of data from this sector here. I'm waving my arms around wildly, you just can't see it, which is probably a good thing. So cross-pollination is something we're trying to avoid, or the market would like to avoid, because nobody wants to buy duplicates of the same stuff over and over again, unless you're like a baseball card collector. So you want to be able to get as much raw data as possible for as least money as possible, and you don't want to buy duplicates of data. That's why cross-pollination is not a great thing. Here's another example for cross-pollination. I'm going to skip this one in the video because I know you guys have probably already read over this one. This is not the easiest one, but it is very much a smart contract kind of based thing here. So if you haven't read this one yet, pause the video, go over the example they have here in blue. So areas of opportunity, this is the stuff we keep clicking on as we're going through the video. This is the abstract being solved here. In a perfect storm, supply and demand is brewing within the economy as more companies develop in-house data science and analytic capabilities, and that's machine learning, AI, all of it. The demand for data will accelerate exponentially. On the supply side, smartphones, everybody has a smartphone now, or almost everybody. The deployment of big data capturing solutions, advent of Internet of Things has resulted in ever-increasing amount of raw data. The real question is how much of that raw data is useful for what you really need to know. Like, do we really need to know how many cups of coffee we drink on our internet-enabled coffee machine? When taken together, though, the data economy pie gets larger every day. So the demand for 100% authentic data is going to be what grows the fastest, though, because not everybody is just going to go out and grab as much as they can grab. People need to get stuff that's specific to what they're working on and know that it's correct and true data. Without companies being able to achieve this, the results that they need to succeed in the new data-driven world, things are going to get clogged up. You're not going to be able to finish teaching your machine learning what it needs to know, so it's going to get stuck going over the same cross-pollinated data sets over and over again, because you're just dying for more data, but you can't buy anymore because it's just not out there. So that's where Quadrant Protocol is going to fix that issue, though. So now we get into how this stuff actually works here on page 14. This is a blockchain-based network protocol that enables the access and creation, distribution of data products and services with authenticity and provenance. That part's important. At its core, it's envisioned to act as a blueprint that provides an organized system for the utilization of decentralized data. Quadrant maps disparate data sources so that new and innovative data products can potentially be created, that's the Elons, to help companies meet their data needs. This is intended to be made possible through the participation of the following stakeholders. So this is just Quadrant renaming all the actors that we've talked about earlier and then adding the Elons in there. So nurseries is their name for atomic data producers, the small guys, the ones that are producing small data sets that get aggregated later. Those are the guys that create original data records, that create new stars, is what they're calling raw data. This is where Quadrant starts to, this is their branding here, which then can then be grouped into constellations, which is what the aggregators were doing. It's large data sets. So atomic matter turns into stars, a bunch of stars is a constellation. So pioneers, that's data vendors that create data products with smart contracts on Quadrant. So vendors or aggregators are now called pioneers. Pioneers, they're taking all of the constellations and they're turning around and finding buyers for those. Those are your middlemen. You have Elons, those are visionaries that utilize and create data products with constellations and build new and unique products and services. They rely on constellations and constellation blueprints to make sense of data space, which they travel through. So that's your person that's making mega constellations, making those specific connections in between multiple constellations to have new and interesting ways to interpret data. And then we have guardians. So guardians are master nodes that protect the integrity of the chain, ensuring that it is not compromised. Guardians ensure that constellations created by pioneers are not compromised and provide services for stamping, authenticating, and verifying data. So that's your proof of authority signers there. That's your nodes that are authorized to make sure that as the data comes in and they mine it, that it's hashed and stamped and everybody knows where it comes from, so it's in the ledger. You know, and in this too, this is your chance in the video to make any Guardians of the Galaxy jokes that you want. That was your spot right there. Features, proof of data authenticity, constellations for disparate data sources, and fair remuneration and incentivized sharing. So if somebody asks real quick, 2 minutes or less, what's the pitch for this? That's the pitch for Quadrant. It's proof of true good data, multiple constellations of disparate data in one place, and then fair remuneration for all the actors involved, not just the data sellers or vendors. So now we're getting into the proof of data authenticity. How does that work? Foundations of a data economy must be built on trust. Blockchain's good because now you can have trustless data verification. It offers an immutable record of historical activity. Quadrant will require that all data is publicly stamped so its origin will always be known. Any stakeholder can learn the provenance of data at any time. So they're going to have a portal where you can check on all this stuff and see what the provenance is. Little diagram here if you're a visual learner. It cannot be overstated how important it is to be able to trust the authenticity of the data economy. Without it, current problems will continue to persist. All right, then we have another example here in blue. This is one you can pause the video if you haven't read it before, but I'm assuming you've browsed the white paper and seen this. So constellations for disparate data sources. So constellations are envisioned to be the key to bringing together disparate data sources in such a way that they can be used by pioneers, Elons, and data consumers, end users, to compete with big firms like Google, Facebook, stuff like that. Constellations are intended to level the playing field so that everyone has access to the data that they need when they need it. And then fair, remunerating, incentivizing, sharing. Pioneers will no longer have to worry about the manual process of figuring out how much to incentive each nursery. So that's a group of atomic data providers, the small people there, when they aggregate a data product to be sold on the Quadrant network, because everything's going to be stamped. It'll already be in the smart contract how much of the total amount belongs to each atomic data producer. And so an example here again in blue, mobile data pioneer aggregates data from a couple different sources and creates a product from it. When an Elon buys the product on the Quadrant network, the constellation automatically shares payment for the product between the parties. So the smart contract's already in place, and then it pays out each time. And it doesn't have to be an Elon, it could be an end user, data consumer. But just every time it gets sold, the vendor gets part of it, and then the original producers still get a part as well. And then there's cases where millions of individuals, devices, and sensors contribute data to an aggregated product. Each piece of data on its own is worth fractions of a penny, whatever your smallest denomination is, making incentivized sharing impossible because, if you're providing metadata off of Facebook. Facebook's not going to pay you a tenth of a penny every time somebody pulls your email address, because they would owe you like 2 cents at the end of the year. Constellations in the Quadrant protocol are intended to handle the distribution of these micropayments through the use of quad tokens, because now you have a currency that is, because it's a utility token, is small enough to where you can aggregate and just pile up those tokens till it's worth something. So benefits for each one of the portions that are going to make up the quadrant, the stakeholders. So data consumers, that's the people that are the end users that are using the data. They're going to be able to pull more data, have more 100% correct data. Pioneers will be able to improve the ownership of their data products, make sure everyone's compensated properly, because if you're paying your atomic data providers properly, they're going to feed you more data because they're going to grow and be able to produce more data gathering products. And it's also going to be easier to do all the bookkeeping for that as well, because the smart contract's going to take care of it for you. Elons, that's the new portion here. They have the power to step into data brokering now and make more connections in between separate constellations and give somebody something that they can possibly change the world with. Nurseries, so that's your small constellation as you're aggregating pieces together from your atomics. They're going to be rightfully remunerated, so if you're the guy that's bankrolling a couple different cell phone apps, you can get properly paid instead of just getting paid once. And they're going to fix cross-pollination because it's going to be reduced because the data will be stamped on the Quadrant network at the source. So you won't have as much cross-pollination. If you're an end user, a data consumer, you can be sure that when you're purchasing a set of data, you can confirm that it's not the same set of data you got yesterday. All right, then we have a use case. This is another example of how Quadrant can be used. Take a minute, look this one over. I'm trying to keep this video under like 2 hours. There is a diagram here though, so take a couple minutes in the video here, pause it, go over that portion. And now we're getting more into token economics, distribution, team members, stuff like that. Applications that source from Internet of Things or mobile devices require millions of individual endpoints to produce useful data products. Each of these endpoints will require remuneration in the form of micropayments. These payments will be made using quad tokens from the Quadrant network. So that's one of the ways that they are monetizing this, is that, you know, each Internet of Things sensor, cell phone, whatever, they get paid in quad tokens at the base in the atomic data provisions. So DataStream X, that's the company that's fronting Quadrant. They're also going to be the first user of the Quadrant network. This is not unusual in an ICO to have a company that's already in a business and they've seen because they're in the business, they've seen where it's ripe for disruption with blockchain, so they'll be jumping into the pool by creating their own. So that's who's backing it. So if somebody has questions, you know, is this a bunch of guys in their garage? Do they have any products in the market already? You can say that DataStream X is the creator and going to be the first user of the Quadrant network, so it will have some blood pumping in its veins from the very beginning. So then you've got a couple pages of team members, who all is involved with this. These are people you're talking in your internal chats with. I'm sure you guys know them very well by this point. You've had this project for a little while. Now we're going to break into the tech. Everything still making sense so far, Nick?
It is.
Okay. All right, so Quadrant Protocol, that's your decentralized blueprint. That's the lifeblood of the Quadrant project here. That's proof of authority. So signed nodes, they're already signing everything. That's because it's cheaper gas fees, more transactions per second in a smaller block. That's what you got in yellow there. And because these are signed nodes, they know who they are and they are proper people that are not going to screw up the blockchain. This restricts malicious nodes from entering data into the network. And then you have the external proof of work chain that will be used as an anchor for security purposes. For the time being, it's sidechained off of Ethereum. They could anchor this off of a different blockchain if something else became the new Ethereum. But right now it's on Ethereum. And I'm just noting there that it could be replaced in the future if needs be. Little diagram here. Technical details. This is the same stuff we've been going over here. Data sampling protocol. If you're into your scripting, this will be helpful for you. If you're not into scripting or you're not comfortable talking about this with Telegram users, this is definitely just a look at the white paper on page 25. This is not something that if you don't know what this stuff means, don't sweat this stuff too much. This is not the heart blood of this project for talking about it with Telegram users. But these up here, this is what it does down here. Stamp verification, open constellations where it's two-way bidirectional information, and then network nodes and clients. That's who the operators are, the same people we've been talking about for this whole paper here. Producing clients, guardian nodes, consumers, anchors. So this is just saying that there's going to be a way to access this information. That's the scripting on how to do it. These are the people that are going to be accessing each one of the clients or interfaces. Then data enhancement by Elons. I feel like you guys should be pretty comfortable with this. If Elons doesn't make sense to you, just reach out to me via PM and we'll go over it a little bit more. I don't want to eat up too much of your time here. This is kind of something that's a little bit more important, though, is the public chain anchor. So Quadrant's using a proof of authority consensus algorithm. Any bad actor would need to attack both chains, the Quadrant chain and whatever public chain. Right now that's Ethereum. They need to break into both chains and change the ledger on both to be able to insert incorrect data now. So that's why they're calling it an anchor, because if it's anchored on there, you'd have to rip them both apart and then break into both ledgers to be able to change something. I don't think anybody wants to put malicious data into any metadata bad enough that they want to break Ethereum and sneak into a proof of authority consensus as well. So even if Quadrant makes a bad choice on one of their signers, you still have Ethereum backing you up. You know, it's going to be pretty tough to sneak some poor data in there. And then we're getting into the roadmap here. If you need to, just go to the white paper, take over the roadmap stuff. May's when things are kicking off. Data is going to start being put into constellations in October. Micropayments will be available next year. Distributed guardian nodes by 2020. So really everything won't be locked down until 2020, but it will start to build up here starting this year. Mainnet will launch. Everything will be shown as proof of concept by next year. Market strategy. This is where things get a little unusual for this ICO for me. Just showing market cap, stuff like that. Right now, business analytics revenue is 130.1 billion in 2016. By 2020, it's expected to be 200 billion. So this is another one of those products where there's lots of market cap going on here. Differentiating strategy. So what are they going to do different than Facebook or Google or Amazon or whoever else? Data marketplaces and middlemen, data aggregators, vendors are already accessible to everyone, but that's where you get into cross-pollination or pricing's not working out for you. So Quadrant, by virtue of being a blockchain, is aimed at differentiating itself by providing a framework for authentic, trustworthy data, compliant as well. So metadata, like personal details on metadata, if you've been reading up on Cambridge Analytica and the Facebook deal, that portion of the data, they're implying here anyway, that will be hashed out under the private keys for the atomic data providers. So when the government knocks on the door of a data consumer asking where they obtain their data, they can answer with confidence. Companies are projected to see value added by this approach and will hence opt to move away from opaque marketplaces. So, you're not going to get in trouble for selling data or purchasing data from an unscrupulous company that's pulling too much personal information and keeping it, or selling it to the wrong actors. Where Quadrant is designed to really stand out from its competitors, and this is where you can refer to your FAQ or Google to get some more information on these companies, is the opportunity provided by Elons to innovate using diverse arrays of mapped data sources. So Elons really is the key to how they're different than everybody else. That's why I keep harping on it in this video. Payment model. Everyone wants to know what the payment model is. Quadrant will be run similar to a not-for-profit system. It will use Ethereum's gas model to ensure stability of the network without charging excessive fees for derived profit. So this is a non-profit scaling company here. If you're holding this token, you're not going to get additional value by holding it because gas is not going to be wild or anything like that. When nurseries stamp, they pay a small amount of quad, which goes to the guardians. That's the people that are anchoring the chain as an incentive for maintaining nodes within the network. Users will pay in quad to create constellations. That's where you're piling all of the atomic data together into stars. But the total payment for the data within the constellation will go to the owners. That's the atomic data producers. So everybody gets a cut, but everybody, even the small guys, are getting a portion of that profit there. So we're getting into token details here. It is the E-Quad. It's an ERC20 standard compliant digital token on the blockchain for Ethereum, which will be sold and then converted into Quad via Gateway when Quadrant's mainnet is launched, which is coming up soon. Please note that Quad is a non-refundable functional utility token that will be used as a unit of exchange between participants on the Quadrant network. So there is no value in holding Quad. There may be value in holding E-Quad, but if you're just sitting on Quad, it's like sitting on a pile of stamps that are not going to go up in value. Users of Quadrant and or holders of Quad which do not actively participate will not receive any Quad incentives. So if you're holding Quad, you are not going to get airdropped more Quad just because you have a bunch of it. Quad is an integral and indispensable portion of the Quadrant network because without Quad, there would be no incentive for users to expend resources to participate in activities or provide services for the benefit of the entire ecosystem on the Quadrant network. So basically, because this is a token, all micropayments are done in, and this is going to be, when they first launch, they'll be able to use fiat and smart contracts, but they're going to try to phase it out. That's normal on an ICO white paper. It's going to be the lifeblood for this project, so this is the token that's going to be used. You have to use it. So purchasing Quad, committing activities in the Quadrant network requires Quad. I think we're all pretty solid on that. Users can procure eQuad through the initial crowd sale. They can convert their eQuad to Quad using the Quadrant network. The gateway conversion is 1-to-1. Further token acquisition channels will be announced at future dates because they are hanging on to some of the original TGE. It's not all getting sold in the ICO. Now this is the part I was talking about, simple versus complex structures. This is a weird spot to put it in the paper because it's in the token generation portion. I don't know why that happened that way. But so this is talking about how you pay for accessing information. So at first, fiat currency is used to settle transactions. This will be phased out as the ecosystem develops. No surprises there. Elons will stake Quad for access to databases for experimentation and trials. Once they create something, pioneers will be able to enable multi-tiers at different staking levels. So what it's saying there is if you're an Elon and you're wanting to, build a new mega constellation, you might want some of a pioneer's data or a data vendor's data, or you may want all of it, and they'll have pricing structures set up where if you want to buy one data set, it's cheaper than if you're buying all their data sets. Sampling and verifying data. Quad will be used to submit stamps on the network. So if you're a nursery, you have to pay in quads to stamp where each data set comes from. Those payments are paid to the Guardian nodes as incentive for verifying transactions and submitting proof of the Quadrant network to data consumers, and Elons will be able to verify that data on the Quadrant network via their open source clients that we were scrolled past earlier. So simple subscription payments, that's where you're just getting one thing from somebody. Quad's required for executing constellations. Payments will go to the Guardian nodes. The value of Quad, the value in Quad of the data being transacted will be set by pioneers. That's your data vendor, the entity that created the constellation, and received from the data consumer. For standardized data products, pioneers can price their data in Quad by either pegging it or floating it to a fiat currency. So you can tie it directly to the dollar, or you can float it, it's worth a little bit less than $1, or pounds, Ethereum, whatever. for right now, that'll make it where it's something where people can understand what the value they're purchasing is, so they can understand, you know, I was paying $50 for this data set yesterday, now it's in the blockchain, is there equivalency? Yes, it's pegged to the dollar, so it makes sense. So for complex subscription payments, though, minimum transaction fees are established in a constellation, so when aggregated data products are purchased, the entire value chain can be remunerated. So that's each individual player that put part of their data towards that constellation, so each one can get paid. This is done instantaneously without the need of burdensome administration because it's on a smart contract. Then back to staking for access. This is just to underline again, because Elons are a big part of their sales pitch here. Elons will be granted access to different data sets and services by staking Quad. Multiple tiers of services will be created that will enable everyone from individual data scientists to large innovative labs. Everyone will have access to this type of stuff that way. Staking ensures good behavior by the parties because bad actors can lose their stake. Conditions will be placed on the staking party within each tier to ensure fair use and incentivize pioneers to enable access. Not a lot of information in the white paper on what those levels are going to be or how much is going to have to be staked. If this is something that's been gone over in the internal chat, because I'm just now getting online with them, I'd love for you to message me and let me know what kind of stakes they're kicking around right now for Elons. And then they got a note on here that, you know, they could do future services. All right, so we're rolling into the stuff. Refer to your FAQ for updated versions of this information, but you know, how much is it worth, when are the public dates, all that stuff, that's FAQ information. Distribution, 40% to crowd sale, 20% to the company reserve, 20% to stakeholders, 10% company reserve for network partners and community development, and 10% going to the team. So there have been some projects, we've all had them, where the team's holding a large portion, or the company's holding a large portion. So they've got the reserves broken down a little bit, but at the end of the day, if you look at it, it's still 50% is being held by the company, with 10% paid for the team as well. So 60% of the tokens are being held by the company, but it is broken down. This is an easier pill to swallow if you break this out when you answer that question in Telegram. Don't just be 40% is being sold, 60% is being held by the company. Make sure you take time and break that down for them. And then they've got how their pools are broken down and what their pools are going to be used for. Pool D and E are the ones that are a little bit different than any other particular ICO. If somebody wants to get into the nitty gritty, this is page 37 to see what those annual rates transferable are going to be for the reserves. It's not just going to be locked for 30 days and they have access to all of it. It's like we were talking about earlier in the video. It's going to be broken down by year. And then governance, there is a treasury, there is a lockup on eQuad. Unsold tokens will not be burnt, they'll be given to the reserve. The treasury is going to be in charge of deciding when that will be released. Here's a note here: all eQuad not sold during the private sale, public sale will be locked in reserve for a minimum of 2 years and used for future token sales. So it's not being burnt, it's being held. Reporting, semi-annual reports will be made available to the public for usage and distribution programs of eQuad pool in the D pool. So, you know, that's something else. If somebody's uncomfortable with how much the company's holding, there will be reporting for that. And then this is another note here in pink: to ensure transparency in the technology and business timeline of the Quadrant protocol, eQuad holders will be invited to quarterly town hall meetings to the Quadrant protocol team to discuss vision, milestones, and next steps forward. Open Slack and Telegram channels, that's you guys, will be available for ensuring ongoing dialogue. For the avoidance of doubt, the views of eQuad holders will be considered, but the application of assets of the company, including those without limitation, all eQuad held, that's in quotations there, remain under the full control of the board of directors of the company. That said, you guys know what it's like when you have a big outcry of people in a town hall meeting that something doesn't sound right. Voices get heard, voices get discussed, things get changed a little bit. So it's nice they put that notation out there that, hey, we're going to listen to the community. You'll have an open channel to discuss things. If you're wanting to invest heavily, you won't just be a public key, you'll actually be able to be a voice that can be heard as well. So that's something else that you can point out to Telegram users to disperse FUD allocation on contributions. Again, double check your FAQ paperwork for this. They do have an R&D fund in there, network and development funds, security, legal, treasury, yada yada. Nothing wild there. Another remit of their milestones that they have set up here for their roadmap. And then your standard risk analysis paperwork at the back here. So this is Quadrant. This is one of those papers that it is a little bit of an airy concept, even though Nick keeps saying he gets it. If you do not get something, if something's not making sense, please reach out to me. It's at WTR Lighting on Telegram, and we will go over it until it makes sense. That's the reason we are here. So please reach out to us. We appreciate your time today. So this is Will at WTR Lighting.
And Nick at the Nick 87.
Thank you, guys.